Welcome to Dark Feed, where once you find the feed, it finds you. I want you to imagine something for a second. You're driving home at night, quiet, cold, the kind of night where the sky is nothing but a black mirror, where even your headlights feel like they're swallowed by the dark. You know these roads, or at least you think you do, and then suddenly you're just gone.
No crash. No scream.
No one hears you leave. Just a voice on a phone, a few words, and then silence. That's what happened to Brandon Swanson. It was May 14th, 2008. Brandon was 19 years old. He had just finished up the spring semester at Minnesota West Community and Technical College, where he was studying wind turbines. Smart guy, practical too. He had plans, big ones. He was from Marshall, Minnesota, a small town with that usual Midwestern vibe. Everyone knows everyone, and things don't usually get too weird. But that night was the exception. Brandon had been out celebrating the end of the semester with friends. Nothing crazy. A few drinks, a few goodbyes. He visited two small towns that evening, Canby and Lind, both within reasonable driving distance of his hometown. Around midnight, he decided to head home. It wasn't a long drive, but it would become his last. At 1:54 a.m., Brandon called his parents. Not to say goodnight, not to ask about something trivial. No, he called them because he had driven into a ditch. He said he wasn't hurt. The car wasn't damaged, but he couldn't get it out. He sounded calm, not scared, just annoyed. He told them where he thought he was, near Lind, a small town about 10 minutes from their house. His parents, Annette and Brian, got into their truck and headed out to find him. They kept him on the phone as they drove. That's what makes this story so disturbing. Brandon stayed on the line for nearly 47 minutes. He said he could see lights in the distance, maybe a town. He was going to start walking toward them while they drove around trying to find him. They flashed their headlights. He didn't see them. He flashed his. They didn't see anything either. Something wasn't right. They kept talking. And then suddenly Brandon interrupted himself. Oh, shit. That was the last thing he ever said. The call went dead. Let that sit for a second.
No scream. No struggle.
Just those two words. And then nothing. His parents called back. Again and again. No answer. They drove up and down gravel roads, searching in every direction. Eventually, they went to the police. You'd think that would be the part where things kicked into high gear. A missing teenager. Middle of the night. Last heard on a live call. But it didn't go that way. The local authorities initially brushed it off. Said he probably ran away. Said it wasn't a big deal. Said he'd show up in the morning. He didn't. And the sun rose over an empty road. Let's rewind a bit. Take a closer look at that phone call. 47 minutes is a long time. Brandon didn't seem panicked, at least not at first. He was trying to be helpful, telling his parents what he saw, talking them through his location. But the more they talked, the more it became clear something was wrong. He said he was near Lind, but when police finally tracked his cell phone pings, they found something chilling. He wasn't near Lind at all. He was about 25 miles away, near a town called Porter, Minnesota. That's a huge discrepancy, especially for a kid who knew the area. Brandon wasn't the type to get lost. So how did he end up so far off track? And why did he think he was somewhere else entirely? Some people say he was confused, maybe tired, maybe drunk, but others think there's more to it. Let's talk about that location. Porter isn't a big place. It's surrounded by open fields, gravel roads, and a whole lot of emptiness. The area where his phone last pinged is mostly farmland. Low hills, barbed wire fences, and narrow ditches filled with spring runoff. It's not the kind of place you'd expect someone to just vanish. If something had happened to him out in the open, you'd think there'd be evidence. A trail, a shoe, a dropped phone, something. But there was nothing. The next day, Brandon's car was found on the side of a gravel road near Taunton. even farther northwest of Lind, right where that final cell tower hit. The car wasn't damaged. The keys were gone, and there were no signs of struggle. No blood, no tracks, just the car sitting silently like it had been placed there. Search teams came out. Dogs, helicopters, volunteers. They combed the fields for days, weeks, months. A scent trail was picked up that led from the car to the edge of a river, the Yellow Medicine River, but it ended there. The river was searched thoroughly. No body,
No clothes.
no sign of Brandon. That's when the theories started. Some believed he drowned, that maybe he tried to cross the river in the dark and slipped. But cadaver dogs never hit on anything. And that river is not that deep, not enough to hide a body for long. The current isn't strong enough to carry someone away unnoticed. Others think he was picked up. Maybe a passing car stopped. Maybe someone offered help or something worse. But that doesn't explain the last words. That sudden, "Oh shit." If someone had grabbed him, wouldn't you hear more? A struggle, a scream, and then there's the darker theory that maybe Brandon saw something, or someone, that maybe those lights in the distance weren't a town, that maybe he wasn't alone out there in the dark. Here's a detail that rarely gets mentioned. The road where Brandon's car was found, it's almost entirely lined with drainage ditches, deep ones, full of water and mud. You wouldn't want to walk into one by accident. But even if he had, again, no trace, the terrain was flat, open. The dogs would have found him. The infrared helicopters would have picked up a body, but they didn't, which brings us to the truly unsettling part. In 2023, 15 years after his disappearance, authorities announced they had discovered a single piece of human remains believed to be Brandon's, located on private property near the original search area. But no details were released. No confirmation of how he died. No story, just a quiet press release. No answers. His family has waited over a decade for closure. And even now, all they have are theories. A final phone call, a mystery carved into the dark rural roads of Minnesota. So what happened to Brandon Swanson? Why did his last words sound so sudden, so final? Why did he seem so sure of his location when he was 25 miles off? And why, after all these years, does his story still feel like something isn't adding up? The deeper you look, the stranger it gets. Because sometimes, people don't just disappear. Sometimes something takes them. Imagine you're standing in the middle of an open field. It's flat, silent, no trees, no people. The only sound is the wind brushing through tall grass. And somewhere out there, maybe 100 yards away, a phone call ends. The last thing you hear is someone say, "Oh, shit." Not screamed, not panicked, but sharp, final. Then silence. No footsteps, no yelling, just the wind. That's the image that haunted the dozens of searchers who came out in the days after Brandon Swanson vanished. What they were looking for wasn't just a missing person. They were trying to locate a voice that had disappeared into nothing. The first 24 hours are the most important in any missing persons case. But Brandon's clock started with a delay. The local police department in Lind, where his parents first reported the incident, initially treated the disappearance as just another college kid who had probably gone off somewhere to cool down. Maybe he was hiding. Maybe he just didn't want to be found. Annette and Brian Swanson knew better. They knew their son. He wasn't reckless. He wasn't impulsive. And most importantly, he wasn't the type to vanish. By the second day, the tone shifted. When the cell tower data finally came in, it shattered the police's early assumptions. Brandon hadn't been anywhere near Lind. He had been nearly 25 miles northwest, near a narrow back road between the tiny rural communities of Taunton and Porter. So the first major question became clear. Why did Brandon think he was in Lind when he wasn't even close? Some people speculate that in the dark, disoriented, maybe buzzed from a few drinks earlier in the evening, he had simply gotten confused. But that doesn't sit right. Brandon had grown up in the area. He'd driven those roads countless times. This wasn't some random city kid lost in farmland. He had lived there, and that makes his mistake harder to explain. When searchers found Brandon's car, it was off a gravel road. Highway 68, a mostly deserted stretch that winds past open fields and sparse tree lines. The car wasn't wrecked.
No busted headlights. No dented fenders.
It was just there. Keys missing. Driver missing. Inside it was clean. There were no signs of a struggle. The doors were locked. No blood.
No torn clothes.
It was as if he had stepped out, started walking, and never stopped. Search and rescue crews came in within hours of confirming the location. They used everything: cadaver dogs, infrared-equipped helicopters, ground teams, horses, drones, hundreds of man-hours, but nothing turned up. Here's where it gets stranger. The dogs, trained to follow scent trails, picked up Brandon's trail from the car. It led down the gravel road, turned left onto another rural path, then into a field. Then it veered sharply toward the Yellow Medicine River. The trail ended at the water. Everyone assumed he'd fallen in, so they dragged the river. They searched downstream. Divers were brought in. Nothing. Not a shoe, not a piece of clothing, not even a cell phone. But let's pause and really think about that. Brandon had been talking to his parents when he supposedly fell into this river. He was walking, describing his surroundings, calm, focused, and then just 2 words. Oh shit. Some say he might have slipped on the bank, lost his balance, hit his head. But there's a problem with that theory. He would have dropped the phone, maybe made a splash, maybe gasped, and yet there was nothing but those words, followed by immediate silence.
No rustling.
No impact, just dead air. And the phone? It never reconnected. For a while, the phone continued to ring when his parents called back. That means it was still on, still powered, but not answering, not moving. Authorities worked with the phone company to get more precise ping locations, but in 2008, triangulation wasn't as advanced. The best they could do was narrow it to a general area of several square miles. Flat farmland, ditches, trees, ponds, fences, but nothing conclusive, and still no Brandon. By now, rumors were starting to grow. Locals were uneasy. Some whispered about people in the area, people who might have been driving around late that night, people who might have picked him up or followed him. The roads out there aren't well lit. Most don't even have street lights. You can drive for miles and not see another soul. It would have been easy to miss someone walking along the edge of the road, unless you were looking for them. Some investigators started to quietly consider whether Brandon had encountered someone. Maybe someone who stopped to help. Maybe someone who had other intentions. But again, the call. If something had happened during the call, wouldn't you expect a longer reaction? Wouldn't he have said more than just 2 words? Unless it wasn't a reaction to someone grabbing him. What if it was something he saw? Something in the distance? Something moving? Or something that shouldn't have been there? One theory suggests Brandon might have come across an abandoned structure. A barn, maybe, or an old silo, someplace to take shelter, and maybe never left. But search teams scoured every building in the area, every shed, every hunting shack, every ditch. They turned the area into a grid and walked it step by step. Still, nothing. Then the case took a new turn. 6 weeks after the disappearance, a farmer contacted the sheriff's office. He owned land within the search radius and had found a pair of shoes near one of his drainage canals. They looked about the right size. They were muddy, worn. Everyone thought they were Brandon's, but they weren't. DNA came back negative. So now there was another problem. Someone else had lost their shoes in the same area where Brandon disappeared. Or worse, maybe someone else had been out there that night. Let's talk about the terrain. Spring in Minnesota isn't exactly forgiving. The nights are still cold. Mud collects in low spots. Ponds form where fields sag. The area where Brandon's car was found is a patchwork of farmland, narrow culverts, old fence lines, and shallow gullies. It would have been easy to twist an ankle, harder to get truly lost unless you were injured or being chased. Some reports say Brandon told his parents he was cutting through a field, that he saw lights up ahead. But the town those lights should have belonged to? It was miles away, too far to see. So what did he see? One theory, almost never spoken aloud, is that Brandon wasn't alone. That someone else was moving through those fields that night, watching, maybe following, and that those lights, they weren't from a town. They were from a vehicle. And maybe the driver wasn't there to help. Annette and Brian Swanson never stopped searching. For years, they organized search parties, walked miles of farmland, knocked on doors. They became experts in missing persons law. In fact, Brandon's law was passed in 2009, making it mandatory for Minnesota authorities to immediately begin investigating reports of missing adults under suspicious circumstances. It was a direct response to how their son's case was initially handled. But law changes don't bring people back. And Brandon remained missing. Then, in 2023, 15 years after that final phone call, there was a breakthrough. Authorities announced they had discovered a human bone on private property near Porter. Lab tests suggested it likely belonged to Brandon Swanson. But the announcement was quiet. No press conference. No full report. Just a vague confirmation. And that's where the trail ends. Again, one bone.
No explanation.
No story of what happened.
No closure.
People who live near that area still talk about it. Late-night truckers say they feel strange when they pass that part of Highway 68. Like the air gets heavier, like they're being watched. A few even claim to have seen something. A figure standing in a field, tall, motionless, sometimes with a faint light beside it. But when they stop to check, there's nothing there. Maybe it's just a ghost story, or maybe it's Brandon, still walking, still trying to find home, still saying, "Can you see me?" I used to think the worst part of a missing person case was not knowing where they were. But after Brandon Swanson vanished, I realized something worse, believing you almost knew. Believing that answers were just inches away, if only you'd looked harder. If only you'd asked one more question, knocked on one more door. We left off with Brandon saying, "Oh shit," and the call going dead. The search began immediately, first by his parents, then law enforcement, and eventually hundreds of volunteers. They combed every ditch, drainage pipe, and creek in the area he was believed to have disappeared. But Brandon didn't just vanish from a highway. He vanished from time. Like something had scooped him up between the moments, between heartbeats. A glitch no one saw. The police were initially slow to take it seriously. A college kid, out late, probably just sleeping it off. But when the hours passed and Brandon never came home, when his phone kept ringing until it didn't, reality began to sink in. They tracked the last ping from his phone, not near Lind, not where he told his parents he was. The tower that caught his call was miles away, near Taunton, Minnesota. That single discrepancy reoriented the entire search, and the questions started piling up like bodies. Why had he misidentified his location? Brandon was familiar with the area. He'd grown up there. Did he hit his head in the crash? Was he disoriented? Or was he being deliberately misled? Let's step back into the timeline. Brandon had called his parents just before 2 a.m., saying he was stuck in a ditch, uninjured, and needed help. He described his surroundings, told them he was near Lind. But after the phone call ended abruptly, and he never called back, the investigation would prove he'd never been near Lind at all. The detail is haunting. It's as if he was reporting from another world. One that looked like Lind, felt like Lind, but wasn't. The maps didn't match. The weather didn't match. Nothing did. The roads in that region are endless. Gravel veins through cornfields, narrow bridges over shallow creeks, dirt paths forgotten by GPS. This isn't suburbia. This is open land, unlit, unmarked, and mercilessly quiet. When search teams combed the area near Taunton, they eventually found his car. It was off the road, but there was no damage, no skid marks. The door was shut. He's gone. No sign of a struggle, just parked, as if he had stopped for something, or someone. The grass around the vehicle told its own story. No footprints leading away.
No drag marks.
Nothing to suggest a direction of travel. But cadaver dogs traced descent. From the car through a field down to a creek. Then it ended. A ghost trail. A scent without a body. Theories sprang up like weeds. Some believed Brandon drowned in the creek. The area was known to flood, and the current could be stronger than it appeared. But despite dragging it repeatedly, they never found a body. Not then, not ever. Others claimed he faked his disappearance, that he was alive somewhere, that he wanted out. But that doesn't explain the call, the panic, the abrupt end. Still others pointed to the geography, sinkholes, abandoned wells, hunting pits. The Midwest has scars in its skin, and if you fall into one of them at 2 in the morning, no one hears you scream. But those were just surface-level ideas. Dig deeper and things get darker. One search volunteer, who joined the effort 6 days into the investigation, shared something that chilled me. They were canvassing near the Yellow Medicine River, a rural area peppered with old barns and collapsing grain silos. The team was instructed to call out Brandon's name every few hundred feet. She told me that during her second pass, she paused near a barbed wire fence and called out, "Brandon," and she swore she heard something back. Not an echo, not an animal. It sounded like her own voice, coming from behind her. Same tone, same word, as if something had repeated it perfectly. She turned around, expecting another volunteer. No one was there. She left the search the next day and never went back. It gets stranger. Over the years, more than a dozen people involved in the search reported seeing lights in the fields at night. Not flashlights, there were plenty of those. These were described as flickers of blue and green, rising above the tall grass, moving without sound. One farmer, who owned property adjacent to where Brandon's scent trail ended, claimed he began hearing tapping at his back porch every night around 1:50 a.m. He'd go to the window. No one there. He installed cameras. They'd glitch out right before the noise started. He told police once. They dismissed it, so he stopped asking questions. You might think that's the edge of believability, but we're not done. Because in 2012, 5 years after Brandon vanished, a group of amateur investigators recreated his phone call using high-end mapping software and environmental data. They tried to trace where he might have walked in relation to his last known cell ping, how long he could have realistically stayed on the line with his parents, and what landmarks he might have described. And they noticed something horrifying. Based on timestamps, Brandon would have had to pass directly through a known hunting preserve. One that, due to local disputes, had been shut down and fenced off illegally by its owner. Locals called it the Black Woods. Trespassers weren't welcome. Rumors circulated for years about illegal activity on that property, trapping, unlicensed hunting, even cult-like gatherings. Most of it was dismissed as folklore, but a Freedom of Information Act request uncovered a police report from 2006. A hiker had gone missing in that same area for 9 hours. When found, she was disoriented, barefoot, and had no memory of how she got there. She remembered walking past something she called a wall of static, then waking up beside the road. No one connected the dots back then. But now it's impossible to ignore. What if Brandon walked into something he wasn't supposed to see? What if the creek wasn't the end of the trail, just a waypoint? Over the next decade, Brandon's case became one of the most haunting unsolved disappearances in the country. People still leave flowers on the fence post nearest his last known location. His family set up a scholarship fund in his name. A law was passed, Brandon's Law, requiring immediate action in missing adult cases. But none of that brought him home. I once spoke to a retired deputy who worked the case early on. He asked to remain anonymous, but he said something I can't stop thinking about. "We were looking for a body," he said. "But maybe we should have been looking for a door." A door. That word keeps clawing at me, because here's the part I've never shared publicly. I visited the area myself last year. I wanted to walk the same path, feel the air, understand the silence. And one night, around 2 a.m., I parked near the same creek where the scent trail vanished. I stepped into the field, flashlight in hand. I called his name once, just once. Brandon. The sound echoed, soft and quick. And I swear to you I heard it back, fainter, from deeper in the field. Not an echo, not a bird, a voice, my voice. I didn't go further, couldn't, because in that moment, I realized something. Maybe we're not supposed to find him. Maybe Brandon wasn't taken. Maybe he was invited. And maybe, just maybe, that's the real horror. Not that he's lost, but that he's still walking, just a step behind us, on a path we can't see, whispering a name we forgot how to answer to. And that's where I'll leave you tonight. Sleep tight.